Oops. How about that? All right. Welcome to another episode of the Liberty Dad Podcast. Tonight, I step away from politics to continue my new series, Dad Talk Roundtable. Regular audience members will know that Fridays, I try and invite dads on to discuss what is important to them as a father. These are just solo dads, just me one-on-one with another dad. I reserve 7:30 a.m. and 6:30 p.m. to accommodate dads. So if you're a dad, reach out because I want to have you on the show. But this series, it takes it a step further. Airing the second Monday of each month at 8 p.m. Eastern, I don't just bring one dad, I invite several who I think have solid voices as men, husbands, and fathers. Together, we sort out the good and the bad, and with any luck, we inspire other men out there to be the best they can be. The topic of the evening tonight is how I met my wife and dating tips. Joining me tonight, Adam Coleman, Tyler Janke, and Jacob Winograd. So let's start bringing guys in. All right, let's get them in here. And one more. There we go. I think we got it. There we go. All right, we got it. Okay, so yes, I'm sorry. I'm looking at the chat. I'm looking at a different chat now. Gentlemen, how are you?
I'm looking at that beard.
I know, man. It must be cold wherever you are.
Yeah. Talk about like Pennsylvania is supposed to be like a temperate state. It's not supposed to get below 20, but last couple of weeks we've been in the single digits, a couple times below zero. I was like, the excuse of not moving to New Hampshire is that it's too damn cold, but that hasn't worked for me the last couple of weeks.
That's crazy. Well, I have that excuse because I live in Florida, except for the last couple of weeks because I thought Mother Nature was trying to kill me. I'm just sure of it. So, all right, gentlemen, tonight we're going to talk about a fun topic. We're all dads. We're all husbands. We've been husbands for quite a while. So we're the old men in the crowd. We're going to talk about how we met our wives. And the reason I want to talk about this, I see all this terrible, I was talking to Tyler earlier, I see all this terrible advice about courting women, how to get a woman, settle down, have a family. It is just awful. So I'm like, all right, the men need to step up and be like, all right, this is your game plan, young men. It may not be exciting, but it'll get you there. So we're going to talk about that. Maybe throw in some dating tips. And the dating tips came from a video. I'm not going to play it. I don't think it's necessary. But I saw a video clip where I think it was like Lila Rose and somebody else, but it might have not have been. I can't remember now. But it was a woman talking about when her husband invited her, I think, to like the opera or something. And so she kind of issued this idea of coffee dates. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Maybe we talk about that and we'll see what the men have to say. Like, was a coffee date a good start? Maybe it's not. Maybe you need to buck up and go to the opera. Who knows? So we're going to talk about that. But which one of you wants to go first, gentlemen?
I don't know.
Yeah. Nobody's like,
I,
well,
I
have we been married so long we forgot how we met our wives?
Well, Jacob's
no,
probably been married the longest, right? I mean,
ooh, been married 11
oh,
Get this
years.
right,
guess not. Guess not. I have a combined over 20 years experience,
right?
but currently I'm in the 13th year, so maybe not. I guess not.
Oh, so am I.
Yeah.
Actually, it'll be
This,
12
this,
years this May.
oh, nice,
Well, if Jacob
nice.
wants to go first, I'll let him.
Sounds like it.
Young man.
Sounds like he's dying to tell us the story.
Well, it's a funny story, and you're talking about dating advice, DL, but like I don't have a lot of dating advice for people because I met my wife in high school, so I have zero experience with adult dating. I I I I found someone good and was like, I need to get this on lockdown.
Right.
Stat. I'm not gonna mess around. I mean, I had girlfriends before that and was stupid in high school, like probably a lot of boys and uh, teenagers are. But actually, it's funny. Me dating around and trying to hook up with different girls. It's how I met my wife. So it's not actually the best advice for meeting a woman, I guess, but it was just like I was trying to hook up with her at the time, best friend, and we went on a couple of dates, and it didn't really go anywhere. But she kept on kind of like suggesting, like, "Oh, you and Bria would make a cute couple," and I didn't think that she was interested in me at all. And then we just happened to hang out that summer, and uh, yeah, it just kind of like happened really fast. We were friends, and then realized that there was something there. And 5 kids later, here we are.
Awesome. So tip number one is don't leave high school without your sweetheart. All right, that's tip number one. You do that, I don't know. We'll see what the other guys here have to say.
I at
See
least
what
want to
this
say that, like, it's obviously not being tongue in cheek here. It's
Sure, sure.
obviously not going to work out that way for everyone. But I
Right.
also feel like it could work out that way for more people if they were open to it. I
Mhm.
do think in our culture, there is this sort of stigma against getting settled down too early, or people
Mhm.
thinking that you need to have your life in order before you settle down. And maybe that is the way it works out for some people, but there is also something to like figuring out who you are with that other person. Like you're figuring it out together rather than like making a bunch of relationship mistakes along the way. While it's actually kind of like, for me, it was like it's easier to figure out who I am because I already have the like relationship family stuff out of the way. I don't have to like figure out who I am while trying to play the dating scene. So I think that's a lesson out there. But maybe not for if you're already a dad. It's I guess not really a lesson. But if uh, you know, at least like tell your sons that, right? Like be open to it. If you meet the right person, don't be like, well, we can't settle down now because we're too young. No, if they're the right person, they're the right person.
It's interesting because if we listen to like our grandparents, a lot of them got either married young or married quickly right after me. Like my dad, he met my mother and they went on a date. And on their first date, I think he asked her, he said, "Do you believe in God?" And she said, "Yes." And he said, "I'm going to marry you." And she laughed in his face. And then 3 weeks later, they got married. And they stayed married until she passed away in 2016 from cancer. So it was about 35 years or so. And, but now it seems like people act as if that is like, the super rare thing. But I feel like when you go back a few generations, it was actually a lot more common, I feel like.
I would agree with that. I do think there's a lot of examples, at least in my family, my wife's family, where it was kind of like, they got together young because someone got pregnant.
Hmm.
And I'm not recommending that. That's not what happened to us. But there is something to, yeah, that was kind of what actually worked out for us as we were talking and realized we just wanted the same things that like we wanted to have a lot of kids. We wanted to homeschool, raise them in church. And it was just like, okay, like, you know, there's no good reason for us to not do this now.
Right.
If you don't find that person of shared values early on, then you don't, and that's not what God has for you, I guess. But if you find them early, starting early, I I don't know. I'm also the super radical natalist of the. I think people should have a bunch of kids, obviously,
Hmm.
because that's what I did.
Right.
But you can't if you wait until you're well, it's different for men and women, right? If you're in your 40s as a man, I guess you could still have 5 kids. But for
Right.
women, the biological clock doesn't last as long. So another reason why starting younger isn't always a bad idea.
Right. And I think I think what we're missing in society is the idea that couples should grow together. I feel like we've kind of flipped it and we're like, we should already be established and then we can come together and then figure out how two established people are going to now establish, a union of one essentially. And I feel like that may be kind of backwards.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll shut up after this, but you guys let me know if maybe I'm just the idiot here. But like, what does it mean to be established and have things figured out? I think that really maturity just comes, at least in my experience, when you hit the point and you realize that there is no magic age or milestone where you have it figured out and you're established. Like life is constantly changing, and you have to be constantly growing and adapting and changing as a person too. So I think once you kind of figure that out, like you can't just hit this certain point and then coast. You can't do that in economics. You can't do that in business. You can't do that in parenting, raising kids, and you can't do that in relationships.
Right. Yeah, it's a constant effort. Tyler, how'd you meet your wife? You could, just the current one will work. You don't have to tell us about both of them.
Well, it kind of plays into it, but I want to say a few things. One, just take some analysis out of context here for what Jacob said. I think he said, love knows no age. Is that libertarian? I'm kidding. That's a little libertarian thing thrown there.
Gotta stir it up here. All right.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm also a family law attorney, and you are absolutely correct that you think just because of age doesn't mean your relationship is matured. I see that like on a perpetual basis. Couples that are getting 30, 40-year marriages getting divorced, and they're like children, right? So they didn't grow together, and I think that is the ultimate thing. Okay, so let's go back here. Let's talk about one more thing there. Maybe we'll throw this out there. That statistic, if people are like, I don't want to get married, especially young, because there's that statistic that all marriages, 50% of them end in divorce. Very misleading if you look at the statistics themselves. I'm not sure exactly as they are now, but it's the people that get married and get divorced, that get remarried and get divorced. Those ones are thrown in the same pot as everyone else. So the perpetual mistake makers make the statistics bad. If you get married, it's almost 70% likely that you are going to stay married. The first marriages continue. So like with anything, I've been divorced, been remarried, and this is going to be the final one. This is a fantastic 13-year marriage. It's going on and on, but I had to take things from the first one and say, not just it's all her fault. What did I do wrong? Right. And then when you figure out what you've done wrong, what are you going to do to make sure you don't make those mistakes going forward? And it applies to anything, taking tests, how you studied, everything. It can go in there. Okay. So, got married, got divorced. And I also, I'm going to piggyback here on Jacob's, getting married young, perfectly fine. One of my best friends in college, he was the only girl he ever dated. He comes into college dating this girl, the only girl he'd ever kissed, and she had a dad that said, "Oh, you need to experience life." So she basically broke up with her boyfriend, who was my roommate, and she would go on a date and then call him and tell him how bad the date was. They got back together and got married in college. So those are the things that, and it's a wonderful marriage still. I'm friends with him, and I think it's great. So that is, I think it's idyllic, right? The way to be. Now, that wasn't my situation. Got married, got divorced. And then I was out there as a 40-year-old man with 2 kids, trying to navigate my way into the dating world, which was just horrible. I mean, I grew up in a Christian community, and it's like everyone, you find your spouse there. That's just kind of the way it happens. And now you're out of that, and that's not really where the action was. So I did online dating. And this is when it was literally just like Match.com. Okay. It was that was the main one. That's the one I was using. And it was horrible. I was in a cesspool of, the same, just random people going over and over. So that kind of thing goes into play when we're talking about the coffee shop dates. Cause at some point you can't spend your money on these dates. You have to do a coffee date first to see if it's even worthwhile. I met my wife in July. I messaged her. I wasn't even going to, reply to someone who didn't have a picture. She didn't have a picture, but she wrote me something. I finally looked at it and it was very intriguing. So we went on a date, and as soon as I saw her, because we had already had this communication back and forth, it was good banter. And then as soon as I saw her, I'm like, oh, I'm screwed. And because, this is going to be it. And yeah, we were married 5 months later. So, and it's been fantastic. And, there's obviously there's trials and tribulations that go along with this, but growing together in the marriage is very, very important. And I will refer this back. This is my last little thing here. You saw Nick Fuentes, if you saw him on Tucker Carlson, and he's ripping on men who have their spouses. She's my best friend. Yeah, my wife literally is my best friend.
Right.
I will, I had a bunch of business during COVID because people could not get along. They were suddenly smashed in the house with someone they had sex with, maybe, but they weren't friends with. That's my best friend. We do everything together. I could just disassociate from the world and hang out with her constantly, and we do. And that's very important because you can only grow together so much as a friend, and you need that friend, the confidants, everything about it. And so don't take your relationship advice. I'm glad to see Nick Fuentes isn't on here tonight, giving his advice of how to date because he didn't have a wife anyway. But,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I did not see that, but I was talking to Tyler earlier, and I said, man, I feel like on X, Twitter, there's all this terrible relationship advice, just awful. And then I go over to Facebook and I see the reels, and there are couples that give relationship advice, and it's actually pretty good. And I was like, if I could just get these people to come over to X, maybe we could clean it up a little bit, because I see some really just, like the whole don't say she's your best friend and all these other clever words that people use are like, you got to get a girl to nag her, or I don't know. There's all these clever words that I don't have the interest in learning, but when I dig into them to see what they're even talking about, I'm like, no, that's just terrible advice. My wife and I, so like you, Tyler, I was married, and actually was married for 5 years, and then it didn't work out. And like he said, if somebody were to sit down and say, Dio, what went wrong with your previous marriage? Pretty much the entire conversation, no matter how long it would be about me. And I would just tell you because did she play a role? Yes. But I don't have any control over that. So not much, no sense in worrying about it, especially, once you get divorced and you're like, all right, well, maybe I can meet somebody else. Let's not repeat this. So I just basically focus on what do I need to do to be a better person, to be more prepared, to be a husband. But I actually met my wife also in July. We had a mutual friend, and he had a house on the lake in Charlotte, and he invited a bunch of people over, and she just came up and started talking to me, and we kind of felt like a friend vibe there. So we ended up hanging out a little bit, going rock climbing, just doing different things. And eventually I was just like, man, I think there's something here. And I was like, I'm going to ask her. I was like, I'm going to do this. So I came over to her house, and she was like, would you like a drink? And I was like, yes, because I was nervous. And so I finally popped the question. I was like, I don't remember how I asked it, but I just basically said hey, I think maybe there's something here. Maybe we can take this friendship and move on to the next level. And then she was like, can I think about it?
Oh,
and I was like, what? And we officially hooked up on, we met in July. We officially hooked up on New Year's Eve. So, and it was only a week later or something like that. So it wasn't like I had to wait, months or anything for an answer. And then it just went from there. And, like you guys, we've had our ups and we've had our downs, and we just figure out, how to work through it, how to talk to each other. For me, how to shut up sometimes, because I'm ornery. I'm a libertarian. I like to argue, and that can cause problems. So, but we didn't really go on a coffee date per se, but because we started out as friends. And so we just did things together that seemed kind of fun. And then eventually, I jokingly said that one night when we went to a movie, and this was when we were just friends. She was like, hey, would you like to go to a wine tasting? And I was like, nah. I was like, my exact words were, I said, wine tastes like piss. And I was like, I don't want to go. And then she just laughed and she's like, okay, well, we were planning to go to this movie and she liked horror films and I don't. But I wasn't going to not go, be like, well, I'm too scared to go to the movie. Like this is not going to happen. So I was like, all right, I'm going to go. Well, we went and saw Paranormal Activity 2. And then I was spooked like hell. And she was like, I was like, man, I'm going to have a drink to sleep tonight. And she's like, you want to go to that wine tasting? And I was like, perhaps. And so then I went and we giggled and laughed and drank wine. And I actually found a wine that I liked at the time. So that kind of helped lead toward, us actually having, a romantic relationship. So that's my story. We didn't necessarily do a coffee date per se, but I agree with you. I think a coffee date is perfectly fine. Like if it's like 5 in a row, maybe you need to step up your game.
Mm-hmm.
But like a first one, just to kind of sit down and talk and just be like, hi, who are you? And, what kind of things do you like to do? And, like, where do you work? And, all those, more casual questions. That seems, fine. Or if you want to just be like, hey, want to go to the opera with me or whatever, like that's fine too. But that could get expensive. So I don't know. But so
let me comment about the coffee stuff real quick. 'Cause
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
it really is dependent on your station in life. If you're a poor college kid, let's say your parents don't give you any support, you have no money.
Right.
What are you supposed to do? Go and spend your weeks or months' earnings to the opera? Maybe she thinks that she's deserving. It's funny. I had just got my first job as an attorney when I met my wife. And I, I was very poor. Okay. I'd gone through a divorce. Anyway, I was in a transition area and the coffee was the way that needed to happen. One, it's a safe spot for them. And then also it's a safe financial spot for me. So, I mean, I'm just, I don't know that women, and she was perfectly fine with it because if it's worthwhile, they're going to stick it out. So, I remember this thing we're watching and they're just ripping on the guy like coffee or he had the whole scenario that he had set out and then she's like banging other dudes or something in the meantime. I think she was kissing him or something like that. So there's some weirdness there. And even about like just, is this the right thing? And it's like, maybe. And if it's not the right thing for you and that guy picks it, well, then maybe he's just not the right person for you. It's so personal, all this. That's all I'm saying.
Right. Yeah. And, I think when it comes to dating, what did I see a while back? Oh, you always see this stuff online where it's like, women are like, well, he's got to be 6 foot tall and he's got to have, 6 figures income and all this crazy standards. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm 5'3.25", and my wife actually made more money than me when we met, and like other personal details are none of your damn business, but like I didn't have all the the necessary requirements that that we hear about. But I've got this theory that if you're kind of put together, and I don't mean that you have all you've got a successful career, you're just kind of competent, that if you demonstrate that you're kind of a competent guy, that you might be somebody that's worth investing in, I think a lot of women will actually put a pause on some of these requirements. So if a woman's like, well, I want to meet a guy and he has to be 6 foot tall and you're 5'8", but if you're competent and you can, especially if you can make a woman laugh, those kind of things, I think you can break down some of these requirement barriers. Perhaps not all of them, and perhaps not all of them with every woman. Some women will stick to it. But I think there's a lot of women out there that would just be like, well, I was looking for a 6 foot guy, but man, this 5'7" guy, he really just makes me laugh and makes me feel good. And man, I don't know if I want to let this one go. Right? What do you guys think?
Well, I'm 6 foot, so I never had that problem. Also, I had to make the
high fives to the sixes.
I had
Hold
to
on.
make the obligatory joke that only people under 6 foot know the exact increment over the inch that they're at. Like I'm 5'4" and 5'8". No, I'm sorry, I had to throw that out there. But no, there's I do think there's something to, Joe, just like if you meet the right person, like you might have those shallow things. That can be both ways. Like actually, before my wife, I only dated blondes and redheads. I had not really dated any, and she's a brunette, and so like she was not, and she's very beautiful, but she just was not like the type that I was usually pursuing.
Right.
And so Uh, some of that's also maturity though. Like I think people that are really that shallow that like they're gonna self-select out of uh your selection
Right.
anyway to some extent. I also think that listen, like everything, social media distorts a lot of this. Like, not every girl is like the, weird OnlyFans e-girl types that you see on like the whatever podcast or that
Hmm.
you see on Instagram or something like that. Like there's also just a bunch of, normal, average, sane uh women out there.
Right.
And I think like, I said at the beginning something that's actually I should really amend it that like I don't have any dating experience, but like that's wrong because like you don't stop dating your spouse. And like
Mm.
I take my wife out on big and small dates all the time. I mean, even just like, something simple like going to the mall and just walking around. We still
Hmm.
do that. Going to the park, walking around, we love to go antiquing together,
Mm.
and things like that. Those are all dates. And it's just because like we enjoy spending time together because we have that friendship component as a foundation. And so like if you have that friendship component, then like the dating almost takes care of itself because like you just want to spend time with each other.
Hmm.
And you want to tell each other about like your hopes and dreams and things that are happening and going on in your life. And that's kind of like that's I think the nuts and bolts of like a relationship are that those kind of like little things of like, you know, when something happens, who's the first person you want to talk to about it? Anything. Something
Right.
happened to you, something going on in the world, something it's just like, for me that's my wife in every aspect. If I've watched like if I'm at work and I'm like in my lunch break and I'm watching something on Netflix, even if she hasn't watched it, I'm just like, okay, now you have to watch this
Hmm.
because like I want to talk to you about it, right? It's
Right.
just so those are the kind of things I think that go a long way towards like even like figuring out if you know someone for a while and you don't get that with them. I don't know. Maybe there's relationships where that friendship aspect is different, but I think that uh, I think that's in most cases going to be a vitally important part of any successful marriage is having a really strong friendship component and usually foundation that starts it out.
Right. Did you guys ever like, and I know that your dating experience was kind of limited, Jacob, but did you ever worry about like maybe you're 6 foot tall? Okay, fine. Or not maybe, but you're 6 foot tall. So fine. That wasn't a concern for you. But were there other things that you worried about? Or were you just like, look, this is who I am. And, I'll meet somebody and uh, they're either going to like it or they're not. Like, what was your attitude just if you could remember, when it came to dating or just women in general?
By the time I was so like I had like a rough breakup with like my last relationship in my junior year of high school, and it had been someone I dated on and off for a while. Um and so after that and like just doing a lot of dumb things, I kind of had like you know, I need to stop doing this, stop doing dumb
Hmm.
things and just settle down and not pursue a relationship for a while. And then it was like at that moment in time that she started reaching out and trying to hang out and just like do like just catch a movie together, go to football games together, just kind of generally hang out and just do casual things. I wasn't at that point in time. I guess I wasn't really looking to. I don't know. I think I was. I had a lot of self doubt in terms of thinking like I wasn't ready to be in a long term relationship with someone who was also ready. So that kind of scared me at first because I was like getting to know her and realizing like she was a rare breed among her. Like she was not a girl who had dated around. She hadn't slept around. She hadn't
Hmm.
she wasn't a party girl. She was like a really mature for her age. And I was like, she's interested in me. Like I'm a mess. I don't have anything figured out. So I
Right.
guess I was kind of nervous about that. Uh, but I guess, to your point, I think she saw that I had the kind of potential to grow into the type of man that she wanted to be. And I wasn't there yet.
Hmm.
Um, it took me a while to even get as close as I am now, and I still have things that I'm trying to improve on. As I said before, you're always trying to identify weaknesses and get better at them.
Mhm.
But uh but yeah, I think she just saw that like, the biggest thing was just that I was willing to level with her and be honest about like where I was at. Um and that I was willing, I think I've always been willing to change. Not like there's like a toxic and a healthy way to say that, right? Like you shouldn't have to like change core values about yourself, right?
Mhm.
Or like betray things about yourself for a person, but you should be
Right.
willing to change and grow for a person.
Mhm.
I think that was
Right.
kind of the thing that I demonstrated to her early on, was that like, hey, I don't have things figured out, but I whatever it is that I don't know, like I'll figure it out and grow, and I'm willing to put into the put in the work for a relationship. And I think what shaped that was I came from a broken household. She came from a broken household. And we both saw how like bad that was, and how
Mhm.
like our parents were, broke up, got with other people, and then broke up again. And we were just like, if we're going to start something, we don't want that. Like, we're going to figure out what it takes to commit for the long haul. And that means like uh, being willing to change in healthy
Mhm.
ways. And that's reciprocal. It's not like I'm perfect and only you need to change. My wife's done plenty of growing up herself. Like, she was mature for her age, but she had her own traumas and weaknesses that she had to overcome. And the best thing about our relationship is that we've been able to be that kind of like mirror for each other at different parts, and help each other become better versions of ourselves.
Right. Yeah. No, I agree. Um, when I met my wife and we were talking about getting, once we got started dating and then we decided that we were going to get married, I remember her saying something to the effect of like, you're a, she complimented me in my ability to excel. And part of that was when I met her in Charlotte, and she had a job, and the company was based in Jacksonville, where we are now. And she got a new position, which took her to Jacksonville. And then she was like, "Yeah, this role." She's like, "I'm not really big on long distance relationships." And so then I was like, "All right, well, this was right about the time that I was shifting my career path. I was like 35 years old, and I'm shifting my career path. I was going from warehousing warehousing management, I guess, not really management like over people, but management of the products and stuff like that. And I wanted to do web development. So I came down and I literally took a whole year off, and I was just like, I just studied web development on my own. And then I was like, all right, I think I'm ready. I'm going to go get a job now. And then like a few weeks later, I had a job, and she complimented me. She's like, yeah, she's like, you have this capacity to learn and to ramp up really quickly. And so, so I think she saw that same potential a long time ago, maybe not specifically that, but just knew like, hey, he's not going to be a bum, right? Like, I'm not married a bum. I don't know exactly what I'm getting 100%, but this guy, he's active in improving himself, and I've always been that way, right? And it's funny, I used to try to joke and say that I married up, and she actually scolded me. Like generally when I just run off and make jokes, she just kind of like ignores me, the typical wife, and she's like, uh huh, uh huh. But on that one, she actually took offense to it. And she was like, no, she was like, you didn't marry up, because that would mean I married down. And that's not how she saw it. And so she insisted that I basically knock off that joke. So I had to remove that one from my repertoire. It was kind of
Hmm.
unfortunate.
That's
It
interesting.
was a fun joke, but
No, that's an interesting way of looking at that joke, because I hear that a lot, and I think I've used it a couple times. But
right.
yeah, no, I think one of the things that came to mind while you were saying that, I kind of forgot was part of what my experience was that like uh, one of the things she recognized was that like I had already realized that I had made a lot of mistakes and knew I wasn't where I needed to be, and like uh, I think there's this thing, especially in young men and sometimes in older men too, where like you just want to fake it and act like you have it figured out, instead of just being
Right.
willing to be honest and be like, no, I know I need to like do something different. That can be in anything. That can be personally, that can be career. Career changes are tough. Finances are always a big, struggle for a lot of marriages and relationships. I mean, um, I had a major career upheaval a few years ago, and my wife and I have a strong foundation, but that doesn't mean that did not put a huge strain on the relationship. Having to like go from saying being self-employed and part of a small business, and like, this is what I'm going to do. And then like, nope, that didn't work out, and having to change and do something, different on the fly. And but yeah, I think that there's certainly traits, that are common to like men and women that are going to be considered, right? Like, you want a man that's strong, right? You want a man that's a provider, a protector, might be something that some women think. But in both ways, the ability to like admit you're wrong goes a long way in like, you know, I guess like warning signs to consider when you're pursuing relationships. Like, can this
Right.
person like it? Can this person identify? You don't want someone who's like weak and like wimpy, who's like, I can't
Right.
do anything right. Woe is me. You don't want an Eeyore, but you don't want someone who's just like, oh, I'm just hot shit and everything I do is great. And it's always it's never me. It's always everyone else.
Right. No, I agree. Tyler, you're awful quiet there, bud.
Well, I was letting you guys say some good stuff. Interesting point there, because there's a fine line between, and I'll put this in perspective, a fine line between like showing some mistakes, the vulnerable side, and then being, as you just mentioned there, kind of the over the top. I went to, I think it was my 10-year high school reunion. Okay. My undergrad was engineering. So I went through engineering, and there was a classmate of mine that had trouble getting through. He had also high school. Then we went to the same college, and he had trouble getting in, and he had trouble. Anyway, he finally passed, and he did it a few years behind me. So we're at their 10-year high school reunion, and he's telling me and a bunch of people how, well, can't get a job. And then I got this job and I keep getting fired. And I'm thinking to myself, we don't know. It's not like you have to tell us that you're have this wonderful job, but maybe you just don't need to tell us how pathetic and much of a loser you are as well. Right. There's also some things with dating. Okay. So I met my wife, and part of this has to do with, I had finally matured enough where I decided when I met her, it was before I even physically met her, we were on the phone. And I just decided I'm going to all these little things that you kind of maybe don't say to begin with, and then we'll see if they work out later. I was just right up front. And one of them was religion. I was, been a Christian all my life, and mostly dating, a lot of these heathens, I just wouldn't say anything about it. And then you'd kind of talk later and, maybe you don't have a connection. And I'm just like, I'm coming right out front and saying it. And then she's like, oh, well, I don't like organized religion. And she had some experience, and we just had a great conversation about it. And so, and we were able to kind of work through that thing. And, my wife, we're same religious thing now. It's a great part of our relationship. I just feel, but it was a seminal moment for me to realize that I'm going to put these things out there. And I think this is an important part of dating, which is it's okay to be maybe not even vulnerable, but to talk about things that could be red flags, or talk about things that you feel strongly about up front, because you're not going to hide them. Right. Mm-hmm. At some point, if you want to have this relationship, those things are going to come to pass. Now, there were other parts of me that I didn't necessarily bring up, but there were things I was working on. And I knew that these were things I was going to be changing in my life. And then, we've talked about them after the fact. So maybe be self-selective about, kind of what you say. And I read a thing the other day that I thought was fantastic. And it was actually Tucker Carlson. He was giving some dating advice on Twitter. And he was saying, when the wife or the girlfriend says, hey, you want to go to X, Y, or, where do you want to go? My whole thing is like, I'll pick a place. And then my wife's got more dietary issues. And then she's like, well, I don't want to go there. I don't want to go there. And so I'm just always like, you pick it. And he's like, they don't really want you to pick. They just want you to make, you're that kind of decision maker person. So I don't even know really the way he said it, but it's more along the lines of making decisions and being willing to change on those. And being that person, for me, it was more about being a person that started to take charge. I was just letting the first wife run over me. And that's not even I'm German. That's not what we do. You stand up, and I do that in court all the time. So kind of came into this relationship and made some of those changes, but I made them right up front, being open and honest about some things. And I think for me, it kind of changed our whole my perspective in dating with her. And obviously it was the last person I had to worry about.
Right. As long as you don't put your hand up when you stand up, it's okay.
Oh, well, that's actually what drew us together. She's Italian, and at some point, Italy and Germany.
Oh
Oh boy.
Lord, too funny. You know, it's funny. I there are all. I think there's always things that we men have to recognize that we have to work on. And, you know, like you said, I agree with you guys. Some things you kind of keep close to your chest because it's not time to reveal that yet. But you have to know that if the relationship gets to a certain point, whatever that point is, you will have to, you know, release that information and let them know. And it can be tricky depending on what the issue is, right? You know, like if you're struggling with mental health, that may be something that you have to, you know, have a conversation with earlier, or if you're struggling with like alcohol. But if you're just, you know, I don't know if it's, I'm trying to think of off the top of my head, something that's a little bit more trivial. And I'm not, nothing's coming to mind at the moment, but you have to weigh those out and try to figure it out. I'm the kind of person, I just like to be open and honest. I find it easier because my memory for facts and figures is really good. My memory for what I said yesterday or, you know, what somebody else said yesterday is very terrible.
Hmm.
So I've kind of constructed my whole life to kind of work around that.
Yeah.
You know, one example is I have never ever in 2 marriages called my wife a bitch either to her face or behind her back ever. And part of the reason was I just was like, all right, number one, the moment you say that, whatever you're arguing about, now you're arguing about the fact that you insulted somebody. That's where that goes. But then number two, um, if there's ever a question like, well, remember that time you said this? If I don't say these things ever, I don't have to worry about remembering that time.
Yeah.
Like, did I say that? I can go, no, actually, that's not in my character, and I would have never said that. And you know, almost 20 years of marriage experience, and I can say I have never said that. I might have said a few other mean things, you know, because I had to grow up at one point. But you know, so I think a lot of it is ends up being know thyself. You know, that's probably the bigger key is to know thyself, know what your weaknesses are, know what your strengths are, know what you're bringing to the table. And bringing to the table means weaknesses and strengths, not just strengths. So
Is it
that's,
okay if I were to call my ex-wife a bitch?
I
Or
mean, like you guys got to
she's
do
fine
your own
actually.
thing.
I didn't even. I feel weird saying that because she's nice.
That's for y'all to work out. That's just my personal rule because,
Okay.
you know, like I don't know. Usually what ends up happening is I remember the intent of what I was trying to say, not necessarily the specific words. And sometimes there is a mismatch. Sometimes I would say something and my intention was, and it's not like I was trying to say something kind of mean and it went really off the rails. It just means like I was trying to communicate an idea and perhaps I did a good job, perhaps I didn't, but I'll remember the idea that I was trying to communicate, not necessarily the specific words.
Hmm.
And so because of that, you know, I lose arguments all the time because it's like, well, you said this, like, did I? I don't know.
I need a
But
transcript.
it's never bad. Like I've never had to go back and be like, yeah, I should have called you a bitch or whatever crazy word. So, you know, and I think knowing yourself, that has been the biggest thing for me. You know, and I think that when you're confident in yourself, which I think knowing yourself kind of helps bring some confidence, I think that helps deal with all the craziness that we hear out there. Because,
Yeah.
well, go ahead.
Well, I think that because we're kind of on this theme of like wanting to be confident, being honest about faults, but not going too far with that. And I think that there's perhaps a distinction to be made between like pride and humility, and sometimes people can think that humility and like the Bible says, like blessed are the meek, and people think this means that you have to be like weak and spineless and soft. And I actually think that like true confidence comes from humility. Like
Mhm.
I think you know the type of strength and leadership I try to embody is to own what I know I can do, and also to be aware of my own deficiencies, not to use them as a crutch, but because I can actually either a if I know I have a weakness, I can sort of, as you said, DL, like I can plan around that. I can figure out how to make that less of a problem.
Mhm.
Or I can say like, hey, like there are times in marriage where you try to like help the other person with their weakness, and that can be kind of a, you know, kind of symbiotic thing where it's like you're trying to uh, help each other in the areas where you have blind spots or you struggle with certain things. You know, whether that's helping in the moment or helping to achieve that personal growth. But I think it's when you don't acknowledge those weaknesses that then you get this kind of phony confidence that it is kind of this weird, uh it can sometimes be hard to delineate, and it can seem like the line is blurry in our culture where like simultaneously you'll hear a lot from the left and from like a lot of more feminist like social talking heads about like toxic masculinity, and yet none of them are going to want to be with a guy who's like a soy boy, right? And so
Mm.
it's like, are your options only Andrew Tate or like I don't know what's a good like, or Ben Shapiro or something. I don't know, or
Right.
I'm trying to think of like a really archetype of like a beta cuck soy boy or something.
Robbie Suave.
Or a Destiny. Here we go. That's a good one.
Destiny. Yeah. I
Your
was thinking
choices
of
are
that.
not just Andrew Tate or Destiny. Like you can actually be someone who's like confident and strong, assertive, but then also just like, like you can confidently just sort of like be upfront with people, not just when you're like dating someone, but just continually just be like, oh man, I struggle with that. And then, the difference between being, uh, doing that in a way that is weak or excuse making is like just saying I suck at this or I have this weakness or whatever, and then just being stuck in a victim mentality. I think that's kind of the difference. It's just a matter
Mhm.
of like, are you excuse making, or are you looking for solutions even if you're identifying problems? My wife wants me to be a decision maker and to
Mhm.
be decisive.
Yeah.
That's not a natural gift of mine. I'm a overanalyzer. As a like I do really well as a Christian libertarian podcaster, because my particular brand of spectrum dwelling allows me to analyze policy and economics and theology and find what makes those things click, find ways to explain them and apply those principles to like what's going on in the world and to help us see those things more clearly. Because I can kind of like take a step back and like I don't have to be super decisive. When I'm making decisions in the moment, it's hard for me to like not sit there and be like, well, I need to account for all these variables and like tackle that problem in the same way that I tackle other problems. Uh, One of the ways I've learned to not just kind of go, babe, I can't do that. It's too overwhelming. You got to make the decisions, is to be like, well, you know what I have to do is just overanalyze ahead of time. I need to kind of think ahead and be like, what are common situations where I need to be decisive? And let me think ahead of time about how I'm going to handle different types of scenarios, whether that's in parenting and discipline, because that's a huge one. The last thing your wife wants to hear when a child's like, throwing a tantrum or being disrespectful and they ask you for help is going, sorry, I don't know what to do.
Yeah,
No, they
you
want
Right.
handle it.
you to, right? No, they want you
Right.
to step in and handle it. And so that means it's like, I can't wait until my children are acting up to have a plan of like, what's the appropriate discipline. I need to think about that ahead of time. I need to talk to my wife about that ahead of time. Be like, hey, I know we're having, like we had a child once for a while who had this problem of just like screaming. And we don't spank, we practice whatever you want to call it, peaceful parenting or whatnot. And it's like, but you still have to discipline. It's like, well, how are we going to handle those things in the moment?
Right.
And uh talking about that ahead of time and coming up with a plan. And so that's just one thing I think it's a common thing of like, especially like millennial men, is like, we tend to be, at least I tend to be, like I had a very authoritarian dad. And so I almost tend the opposite way. And I don't want to be disciplinarian and I don't like confrontation. But you have to learn to be confrontational. That can be like, even if you're temperamentally I'm temperamentally an agreeable, non-confrontational person, but those are skills you can develop if you choose to do that. And so I think that's kind of like the biggest thing that's going to help you in a relationship, whether you're in one already or you're dating and trying to find one, is just like figure out what your weaknesses are and learn to like, doesn't mean you're ever going to, listen, I'm never going to be like the person who should be like, if it's like, millions of lives are at stake and someone has to be decisive and make the right call, that's not going to be me. But I can learn to be decisive enough to like, figure out how to be decisive in common, situations of family and marriage and life and whatnot.
Right. I'm the opposite. I'm like over decisive. I'll make snap judgments on practically damn near everything. And I actually have to work to dial it down a little bit because some of my decisions could impact other people. Like the other day, what was my son doing? And okay. So I could tell him this is fine, but he kind of came home from school, and my wife we were upstairs. He was getting ready. He was doing his shower thing and all that. My wife was like, "Hey, will you ask him why he didn't eat his lunch today?" So I was like, "Why didn't you eat your lunch?" And he gave me some weird, like, "Well, there I was, and I couldn't." He didn't talk like that, but he was just, it's basically that same line of thinking. It was like this weird excuse. And I was like, "Look, we work hard to give you good food." And I was like, so I just made a snap decision. I was like, "From now on, if you don't eat your food, we're going to charge you money." And then I was like, that's what we're going to do. And now he's 6, by the way. just so, so sorry.
You're gonna pay
So
rent, utilities. You're gonna get a job.
Yeah.
right. So
You're
I
paying
go
your
and talk
car
to my wife.
insurance and you didn't even have a car.
So I go and talk to my wife, and she's like, "Well, maybe you could have, had a conversation with me. We could have worked out." So, well, anyway, we had a conversation, and I ended up dialing it back, and we're just like, "All right, if you don't eat your lunch, you can't have a snack when you come home."
Oh, yeah,
Something a little bit more 6-year-old appropriate, because again, like I'll make a decision, and if I'm a little bit irritated, then that decision tends to be a little more on the harsh side. Because I'm just like, okay, fine, that's what we'll do. End of story. Burn the house down just to show you, and I have to dial it back. So it's interesting because I lived so long, you know, in a sense by myself. Even when I was in my first marriage, I was probably effectively living by myself, making snap decisions, not really considering the person that I've married and living with. And, perhaps they should have a voice as well. And I'm sure that contributed greatly to our divorce. So,
Well, I
but,
grew up in a household where like my mom did not have a voice. So I almost overcompensated and was like, well, I'm not going to do that to my wife. But then that turned into unintentionally a sort of like almost pathological, like trying to make her make the decisions because I didn't want to make a decision she didn't like and like try to like erase her voice. And she's like, no, like I want you to be decisive. I want you to hear my input when I have it, but like I want you to lead because she's like, I'm not built for it. She's like, I can do it, but it makes me stressed out. It doesn't make me the best version of myself. She's like, I don't know how to be super decisive and hands-on and disciplined and then still be like the mom that I'm supposed to be, And so it's like, and that doesn't mean that again, it's a give and take, right? Like, doesn't mean she never makes decisions and I have to make all of them, but it's just kind of like, you have to find that right balance, settle into those sorts of things. I'm not suggesting, by the way, in some weird autistic way that like when you sit down and you're dating someone for the first time, if you're at a coffee table that like you spill all this out all at once. Like this is the kind of things that should like, or I'd imagine just organically come out as you're
right.
getting to know each other. I think, as you said, knowing yourself, I highly recommend if people haven't, take personality tests. Like they're really good. They're not like a vanity project. It's like figure out, there's different ones. There's Myers-Briggs. There's the Big Five. Jordan Peterson has his own, which I've never taken. There's another one my friend turned me on to the other day, which the other month, which I took. I forget the name of that one, but they're all good. Now you can get like anything too obsessed into the weeds of that. And, I'm not suggesting you take a personality test and then like, make that thing your identity or something, because like they can be wrong or they can be, but they're useful tools to get to know yourself better. Really good thing if you are married, take a personality test and go over the results with your wife. She will let you know what parts of those tests are wrong and which ones are spot on. And there might be things that you go like, oh, the test said this, but that's not right. And she'll go, no, that's definitely right. And then she'll
Right.
explain to you why it's right. And then, that's a moment where you get to know yourself better. And then you're going to manage all your relationships better, do better in career and family if you know those things about yourself.
Right.
And you could do those love language. I think that's actually an important, you don't need to do it too much, but what's important to you? And because that was part of my first marriage. Quick comment. to add an addendum to what Jacob said about helping your spouse with their faults. It's important that you let them know what those faults are beforehand. Express. I'm just kidding. That just seemed like a problem. They go on there. And as far as the kids not eating their lunch, our youngest, he's 19 now, but he would come home and he wouldn't eat his lunch. And my wife is a great cook, a sandwich, and he would have it in there, but he wouldn't leave it in his lunchbox. He would put it under the couch, all just different places. So I had to have a talk with him. My solution was a little different deal. I said, throw it away at school. We don't know. Your mom is happy. You're still just as hungry as ever. And you've saved your mom some time. So,
Right.
We all have different ways of how we deal with our kids.
Yeah. Yeah. So the other day I was talking to a friend of mine. His name is Tub. You guys might know him. He's also a libertarian, and he's a pastor. And what was I saying? I was saying something along the line of relationships. And he said, look, I told him that I was joining so I'm not particularly a Christian, but I've got a local pastor who I'm talking to. He's Reformed. And so I'm kind of,
Yeah.
I've got what I like to call a exploratory committee with the church. That's what I've got. That's what I'm calling it right now.
Nice.
But at any rate, so I'm actually going to a book. We're studying a book called Impossible Christianity. We'll be doing that tomorrow night. And so I was telling my friend Tub about this, and I told him, I said, look, one of the things that chased me out of the church, I said, every men's group that I ever went to, all they ever want to talk about is porn. I was like, you guys seem to think more about porn than I ever did. So whatever, I don't know.
Were they doing it from the perspective of it's bad or it's good,
Yes,
or
it's
here's
bad,
what
that's
I
bad.
watched today?
No, it's just from his bad. They're
Okay.
you can't watch this. Would you throw away your laptop? And I'm like, it's my work laptop. I can't.
You're like,
But-
I don't watch porn.
So,
Or maybe you do. I don't know.
but I told him, I mentioned, I said, the reason that I was willing to do this book club is because there was going to be something else. Cause I was like, there's all these other areas that could improve in my life, and they would have, they would be very beneficial. And I was telling Tub about this, and he said, every time that he counsels a couple that's having trouble with their marriage, he's like, the first thing I ask him, he says, when did the communication break down? And Tyler, since you are an attorney, and by the time it gets to you, clearly the pastor or whoever they were talking to it was too late. And do you see kind of a similar thing in your line of work? These people have long since failed in their communication. They don't know who each other are. They don't know who they are. Are those things that you can observe as an attorney, or do you not have that kind of sight?
No, you can see it very deeply. And I did a Substack kind of giving an outline, because someone asked me, we all know who he is, and I'm going to blow him out here. Hey, I'm this girl, maybe I'm going to marry her, but do you have some ideas on prenuptial agreements? So I went through that, and it's basically what DL, you and I were kind of talking about back screen before the show, which is acting.
Hello?
You don't
Oh,
put
there you
some. Yeah, in the green room, you and I were talking.
It glitched. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Are we all good now?
Yeah.
Okay. Which is, don't put yourself out there to don't let someone in your DMs, even if it's just innocent, because at some point things are going to go bad in your relationship. Not too terrible, but there's going to be a lull. You're going to have a fight. You're going to feel whatever, and then suddenly there's this person that you can just reach out to and get a little bit of attention. So don't put yourself in those scenarios in the first place. But yes, I do see this all the time, because these parties either it's either with their money, they're not connected, or they are connected. Everyone has separate accounts, perfectly fine. Or they have joint accounts, but no one is, they're not doing an interactive budget meeting at the end of the week, as an example. I see this from the financial perspective, but I think it's very important, because even if you have separate accounts, but you're telling each other, here's what we're doing. My wife and I, every week, it's usually once a month, but we try to do once a week, do a budget thing where we're going over our budget, and we know exactly what's going on. Now, one person may be in control of that, but it's the communication. So I see this from the perspective of we have to do disclosures. So you're getting a divorce, one party has to disclose all their finances to the other, and it just goes back and forth. And it's a requirement in California so that when you get to the end, I had a case once, it was from the 80s, they got divorced. He was giving her his military retirement in exchange for something else. At the time, it was not required for the parties to disclose their finances to each other. So he's, getting to retirement age, whatever, and she finds out he didn't have a military retirement. Well, he didn't disclose that to her, right? These are people that did not communicate. So you're required to do this kind of thing. And I see this way too often where they're just not participating in each other's lives on the financial side of it, which is really, it's a crux for everybody, but it's also the communication. You can have one person do all the billing, but are you both talking about it? And when you're both talking about it, now you're a team. Well, teams do things to each other. Or businesses, they have fiduciary duties, but parties, couples don't always do this to each other. So I mean, come on, communication is a major breakdown for everything. You're not telling them the little things you're doing. You're out doing whatever. You're excited about something else, and obviously But what do friends do, right? Friends communicate. This is why I think that Nick Fuentes' comment is detrimental. Friends communicate. Friends have trust. And these are things that friends don't do is break up.
Right.
Maybe.
To add to that, I was sitting here listening to you, and I was thinking, I was like, my DMs are like strictly like in the technical sense, they're open. Like if you're connected to me, you can send a DM. They're not open for, to meet people necessarily. Like if it's, in the context of a relationship. And which means if my wife and I are not having a good week or a good couple of days, I'm being angry or she's being angry or whatever, like I have no one to go to. So my only option is to work it out with her.
Mm-hmm.
If I want someone to have a conversation with, I have to work it out with her because there is nobody else. There's no backup. There's no, Sally over here, says nice things. I'll just talk with her and she'll there's nothing going on, but she'll just soothe my anger or whatever. There's none of that. I just don't have one. I got a couple guy friends that I could maybe rant to, but, other than that, it's, and I think that may be part of the problem that we have in society. And there was like that argument going around recently about whether married people should have friends of the opposite sex. Mm. And I lean toward the idea that you really shouldn't. In that context, I mean, like, that you associate with one-on-one, right? Not that you can't have any friends at all. I mean, obviously my wife and I have friends. We share, we have shared friends. We have our own friends. I've got friends in the Libertarian Party that she knows who they are, but they're not really her friends, and some of them are male, some of them are female. But I don't, I'm not quite the Mike Pence, but I limit my associations with women just because, I don't want to put myself into a situation that I can't get out of, because the moment an accusation flies, you're basically done. So I assume you guys, I'm pretty sure that Jacob does, and I assume you do as well, Tyler, follow a similar rule.
Well, when I met my wife, I was 40 something. She was a little bit younger, and she had a job, but she was bartending. Okay. As a second job, and she's good looking. And so, so she had friends, she had guy friends. That's just, the normal thing. I'm not a fan of that at all. And there were two specific ones. Now, what she did was she brought me in and they became my friends. So now they were my friends just as much. And so, if they came over, it was all of us doing stuff. It wasn't separate. And I even joined his law firm at one point, and then bought him out, and I do my own thing. So, they were beneficial, but she had to. There had to be a hierarchy, complete hierarchy, and that's the way it had to be from her perspective as well, which was healthy, but also from mine. You can't, it's a very touchy thing because that's even probably just as bad as DMs. I mean, you got a friend. Oh, I'm just gonna go out and get drinks. Oh, are you? Guys don't do those kind of things unless they have some sort of ulterior motive.
Right.
Yeah, I would say, that's like the Billy Graham rule, as sometimes it's called. I tend to sort of think that it shouldn't be this like legalistic thing that applies to all relationships, but it's probably wise general prudence. In our relationship, I just don't. I generally just don't. I've never really had. There might be like one exception where I ever like had like a inkling to even like want to talk to in like long form a person of the opposite sex, and that was like a short term thing, and it was only ever like in open DMs. It would never be like a, yeah, I'm going to go hang out with a girl at like a club or at a bar or
Right.
anywhere, or like that's just, yeah, it's just weird, outside of like, obviously like, so like with LCI, I work not in person, but at least remotely with Carrie Baldwin. And if we show up to like an event together and stuff, then we might be in the same room, not really by ourselves, but like, not with a bunch of people there, but like it's different. Like it's like a work thing, right? Um, so yeah, I don't know. I think there's, I guess I had this allergy to like applying that in some legalistic thing. I think there can be this sort of, I don't want to use the word toxic, but I don't know, just sort of like if you remove our current cultural context and like the Me Too horror and all that, then I don't know out because I think that provides a prudential reason to kind of apply that rule. Outside of that, um, I think there's like a equal danger and like you don't want to be too reckless and act like there isn't something about like interacting with the opposite sex that includes an obvious sort of dynamic not at play with same-sex friendships and peer relationships, but you also don't want to go too far with that where you're literally like, I don't know, like uh making women out to be these sort of like objects of derision or like um put it this way, this might help explain it. Like I have seen, bringing up, you brought up porn, DL. I have seen a lot of people when they're talking about within Christian circles, lust and how to deal with uh, you know men not being beholden to their passions, this sort of like looking down on women and kind of saying that it's like the responsibility of women to dress a certain way and to not tempt men and things like that. And I think that's, and I mean, like, you could reductio ad absurdum and be like, yeah, if you're walking around actually naked, that's probably inappropriate. But I don't think it's like generally the job of women to like go around with this mentality of like, I better make sure I don't accidentally make a man lust after me today. Right. And I think
Right.
there's this component about, especially like the conservative evangelical world I was raised in that had this Billy Graham rule that
Hmm.
applied it in a way that it wasn't just sort of like, oh, we're using good common sense. It was this sort of like viewing women as this sort of like,
Hmm.
you know, well, it's kind of like derogatory towards men and women. It's viewing women in this sort of like their temptresses and their like it's almost like it's like how Christians will complain about secular society hypersexualizing women, but it's kind of like evangelical Christians do that in a different way. Like women are just these sex objects, and like gotta be careful if a man's by himself with a woman, he's just gonna like you know she's gonna tempt him and he's gonna give in. And I'm just like that seems like the wrong message to give. Like you're kind of
Right.
demonizing women and infantilizing men. So I don't know. I guess there's like there's a balance there where again I'm not trying to say we should be naive about it and be like there's not dynamics at play
Hmm.
in male female friendships that need to be considered. That yeah, if you get married, then those male female friendships that you might have had beforehand, they're definitely going to change. I like the way you put it, Tyler. There's like a hierarchy that kind of has to get worked out, and it does get negotiated, and that
Hmm.
negotiation is probably going to be like it might follow same general patterns, but it's probably going to be a little bit different for each relationship based on their past experience and comfort level.
Right.
I
I
just want to
Go
throw
ahead.
this, and I'll let you go. But it's well said. But for me, it's about like respecting. So instead of like saying the women's sexualized, it's more like I'm not going to do that because this is my wife, and I'm going to make sure she's respected and understands that she's the number one. And so if I'm going to go out, I just my personal experience is we have friends, and so it's like first thing my wife does, I'm going to meet this person. Please come and hang out with us. Well, maybe I don't
Right.
want to. But then your trust level and your respect is like, I'm not an afterthought. I'm not, oh, by the way, I met him. It's like, or her or whatever. It's like, you're coming with me. And so
Right.
that respect needs to always be there because you're going to have to trust this person going forward.
Right.
Yeah, I think also like a lot of these things are going to also depend upon if you're doing the other things in the relationship right. Like if you are pursuing your wife and your wife feels loved, in all
Absolutely.
aspects, right? Like her emotional needs are met, her physical and sexual needs and desires are met. And then it's just like you have this acquaintance who's a female who you have to interact with sometimes, or you have mutuals and whatnot. That negotiation is going to be done with your wife still being number one, but she's not going to be as defensive or potentially distrustful or negative towards that association as if you're not doing those things. And that's
Yeah.
kind of the biggest thing. Like if you're not doing those things with your wife, even if you don't have intentions that are dishonorable, you're still not doing your job right as a husband, because your wife should. And like I haven't always done a good job at this, but I think I've done a lot better now, where I try to make sure my wife knows that like she's the number one desire I have in friendship, in partnership, and romantically and sexually. To the point where it's like she, it's started to flip a little bit, where she's just like, you don't have to, I might be overcompensating a little bit in terms of letting her know how much I enjoy her physically.
We're hopeless romantics, man. I think of the I agree with you, Jacob, that I don't think it's a hard and fast rule, and I don't like the legalistic attitude where it's like you should never ever have any female friends or you should never have any guy friends. And I'm like, I think it's a good rule of thumb just to keep yourself generally out of trouble and to ensure that the confidence in the other person remains high. But like you guys said, if you're doing other things, that goes toward that confidence. So like my wife will sometimes go, hey, I'm going out with, she usually goes out with women or couples if she's, associating, but sometimes she'll be like, hey, you want to go? You want to go? She's inviting me. And then if I say, no, I don't want to go, like I still have the confidence, like I don't have to worry and be like, well, what's she doing with that person, or whatever. And I think of it like credit cards and Dave Ramsey. So Dave Ramsey has, he's really against credit cards. And I've always been like,
Putting it mildly.
I don't know. And I'm like, but
Envelopes with cash, that's what he wants.
But on the other hand, people are so bad with credit cards that his advice is actually pretty good for most people. So I think of it like, can you have a credit card and manage it wisely and get an alarm clock or whatever crazy bonus that you're going to get? Yes, that can happen. Do a lot of people do that? No, a lot of people actually fail miserably because they don't have the skill set necessary to manage that properly. And I think the same thing can be said about relationships with people of the opposite sex. A lot of people simply don't have the skill set to manage the relationships properly, their own that they have, and then maybe some other ones, so that they say, okay, I've had one drink, I'm not having any more, because that's, maybe at 2 drinks, my decision-making skills start dropping, precipitously or whatever, and so you have to start, managing yourself. And I think a lot of people just don't.
So if I have a 800 credit score in my marriage, I can just go out and hang out with some other chick.
That's that. I mean, only fangirls for you, man.
Yeah, okay.
Friends, of course, just friends. So, and I think these all go toward, know thyself, and know your spouse too, not everybody's going to be comfortable with something like that. And if your spouse isn't comfortable with it, then you should be willing to say, okay, I'm not going to do it. Not if they're being a tyrant. Okay, that's a different problem.
Yeah.
But it's just if they're just not comfortable, they're like, look, I'm a little not comfortable for whatever reason.
Yeah, I think it's just really context dependent. I mean, like my wife has a childhood, like a best friend that she's known since they were like in elementary school, And like, so like in that context, if my wife leaves me and her friend alone, for a little bit, or even like there's times where I went and picked her friend up when like we were all going to go hang out together, but it was just I'm coming from work and I had to go pick her. Like that none of that was weird because it's like that's flowing from like, well, it's her friend for one.
Right.
That is one major difference there. It's obviously always a lot better if there is a opposite sex person in the equation, that like whether they're friends first or not, if you're all friends, that does make a huge difference. And it's just about context, right? Like again, if I'm at like, so like years ago we were at Freedom Fest and we're all at an Airbnb together with my wife was there too. But then at one point, because it was a big Airbnb, at one point, literally everyone in the room left except it was just me and Carrie Baldwin. I wasn't going to be like, oh no, Billy Graham rule, and get up and run away. It's just like,
Right.
so again, that's kind of what I'm getting at in terms of like the like weird legalistic cartoonish ways of interpreting this, or but like there's certainly like, again, there's also just like the sniff test, right? And there's a lot of times where it's like, if a guy, but anyway, I do think it'd be weird if you're in a happy marriage and you're just like, yeah, but I also want to go hang out with this girl outside of work or something. It's like that.
Odd.
It's odd. Like,
Yeah.
and that goes back to the whole know thyself thing. I think too, because there's a lot of guys that might even convince themselves like, I'm not into this girl. Then one thing leads to another, and then infidelity happens and a marriage breaks. And it's like, if you would knew yourself better, you probably would have realized that you were subconsciously looking for something in this person that you're not getting in your marriage currently. And then why aren't you getting it? Like you need to be self-aware. If that temptation ever creeps in, to be like, well, why is that temptation creeping in? What is missing in my marriage? And how do I address that? How do I fix that? What do I need to do? And again, maybe there's something she needs to do too, but that only starts with communication. It only starts with having those foundations in place.
So it all boils down to communication, having regular conversations, knowing who you are, and to some degree, maybe even expressing vulnerability with your significant other. Because if you can't express the vulnerability with them, then who can you express it to, right? And then that vulnerability could get the best of you. So I agree. I think that was really all that I had. I did want to tell you guys one funny story because it goes to the dating thing. And I think, and I want to tell this because hopefully some guy will be watching it and he'll be like, oh, okay, yeah, sometimes I get embarrassed when I'm out on the dating scene. So I was in the National Guard and we were getting ready to, we were preparing to deploy to Bosnia. This was like in 2001. And one of the guys that was in our unit was going to a local college nearby. And we were getting close to the end of the day and he was talking to his girlfriend and we were all thinking about maybe going to a party. And I was like, dude, I was like, ask her if she's got any friends, right? The normal stuff. And he was like, yeah, you got any friends that, and then he says, what do you do? Well, I wasn't doing anything because I was preparing to go to Bosnia and I just lost a job. And I, of course, wasn't going to say like, oh, I'm unemployed. So I tried to come up with the best thing I could. I was like, I'm in between jobs. It's not really that impressive. It doesn't help. But anyway, he gets on the phone. He goes back to the phone and he's like, okay, whatever. And he just like says no. And I'm like, well, what'd she say? And he's just kind of shoos it off or whatever. So then later I kind of cornered him. I'm like, dude, what'd she say? And he was like, she got mad at me and said, we don't talk to people like that.
Broke ass.
And I was like, damn. I was like, wow. And, like, I didn't really care at the time. Like, I was like, whatever. Like, I don't even know the girl. I've never even seen her. I haven't seen her friends. So, like, whatever, But I tell that story because I want, hopefully, guys to know, yeah, sometimes you will run into the girl that, she does want that 6'6", 6 foot tall, figure from 6 inches down below and all that other whatever. Like you might. Sorry, I got.
That's why I stay at 5 figures.
Right. So keep them humble. But like, yeah, you will run into girls that are a little bit snobby, and you just dust your shoulder off and you go on because there's like 8 billion people on the planet. There is a woman out there, or probably several, that you can run into that are going to be, worth your time. So don't get frustrated by it, guys. So I don't know if you guys
Absolutely.
had anything
Agreed.
else or if we can wrap this up or whatever. I think we're good. Adam never joined us, guys. I just want to say he misunderstood and thought it was next week, not this week. So little communication barrier there. Communication also works on podcast. So get that communication going. Any final words, guys, before I close the show?
Jacob, are we doing in order here? Tyler, any final words? We didn't really do much about dating advice.
You're
And
right, we didn't.
and that's probably a good thing. But Jacob said it just right there. You find that special person. I think as far as dating, and I'll just maybe close with the dating advice. I don't have it. I'm not good with it. I'm so glad I'm married, so I don't have to think about those initial date things. Those were the most painful. But when you find that person, yes, you want to, you do all this stuff that Jacob was saying. You still go out and go on those dates. And yeah, I don't really have any dating advice. Sorry, this is.
My dating advice is my favorite acronym, KISS, keep it simple, stupid. Like, I just think that we overcomplicate it. I guess maybe I'm kind of like saying that as someone who, like, you could say got really lucky and met someone in high school. But again, like, if you stop dating your spouse once you get married, then you're not going to stay married long. And the times of our marriage where I haven't been dating and pursuing her, I've been not coincidentally, the periods of our marriage that were the toughest. The best, because every woman's going to be different, right? It's kind of hard to give dating advice because, like, it really just means, like, know yourself and, like, know your spouse. Figure out, like, what she likes to do, what you guys like to do together. It's like, for me and my wife, going antiquing is, like, one of the, like, that is a slam dunk date for my wife. If I tell my wife, I'm dropping the kids off at, like, your mom's house or my mom's house, and we're going to spend the entire day out going from antique store to antique store, that is like the best day for her. Okay. For another woman, that's just like, well, that's boring. I don't want to do that. Right.
Right.
So it's like, if it's dating advice as far as getting to know someone, like, that's kind of hard to give advice on too, because, like, it depends on what stage of life you're at, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you're young, like I was, you take things a little bit slower. If you're in your 30s trying to find someone, you might want to cut to the chase quicker, I'd imagine, right? And not waste each other's time. So, but yeah, know yourself, know your spouse. I think, or get to know. If you don't know them now, it's like, hey, maybe you've dropped the ball in the relationship you're in, and you don't know your spouse as well as you should. Oh, great! You have a great opportunity now to start to get to know her. Don't be afraid of failure, right? Like, take her out on a date, ask her questions. Ask her, like, if she's having fun. If she's not having fun, if she doesn't like certain things, don't be defensive. Don't be sensitive. Just, like, absorb that, get to know her, and figure out, like, what she does like. Because listen, rough times are going to happen and people change. So, like, you might think your wife and then realize she's changed. You don't know some of the things that she's interested in that she would like. Maybe, especially if kids are in the equation. This happened with me. Like, I knew my wife as a teenager and we got together young adults. Then we had a bunch of kids. About 3 kids in, my wife wasn't the same person as I met when we got together with no kids. And so I
Right.
had to be like, still the same person, but, like, she was more matured and her interests had evolved slightly. So it was like, you got to constantly be getting to know someone. And if you drop the ball, just, like, start now. Right. It's like, so, yeah, I guess that was felt like a lot of rambling, but hopefully there was some good advice mixed in there.
I think so. I think my only advice would just be, like, don't be afraid to embarrass yourself a little bit. Don't get crazy, but it's okay to embarrass yourself in front of a girl trying to, impress her, doing a little peacocking or whatever. And again, we're not talking about, don't be ridiculous with it. Just, try to do something, get some flowers, and if that doesn't work, then maybe you try something else or whatever. Yeah, because I think that the right woman will appreciate, you trying to, maybe impress her a little bit, or, doing something that's out of, your character or out of your skill set. I think the right woman will appreciate that. And that will be one of the things that draws her to you. So I'm a big fan. I know it's tough. I get it. It's tough to, not want to embarrass yourself, but you know, many men have embarrassed themselves and then went on to have very long, happy marriages. So, can't beat that. All right, guys, I'm gonna kick you backstage, and if you got to go, you got to go. That's fine. Thank you guys for joining. It was a great conversation tonight, and I will see you guys again next Monday. So I'm gonna close this show out.
Thanks.
All right, folks. Hope you enjoyed that conversation. Found it a little bit inspiring. But for that being said, I am out. I will not be back until Wednesday, just because you probably heard me coughing a little bit. I'm a little bit sick, and I don't know that I can do a whole show by myself without coughing all over the place. So, but Wednesday I have a guest. I will have somebody on where he's running for. I'm drawing a blank on now, but I have a candidate that I'll be interviewing Wednesday morning. So look forward to that. With that being said, I'm out. You know that I'm all about supporting organizations that hold my values. Make sure you head on over to blackgunsmatter.shop. They've got apparel, stickers, and more. Use the code LibertyDad, all one word, at checkout to score a 10% discount. Or just hit the referral link in the show notes. That'll make it so much easier. Remember, I'm not just a voice on a mic. I'm a dad who's working hard to deliver to you the best libertarian content. Connect with me on Linktree, where you'll find links to my Patreon and buy me a coffee, because every bit helps keep this show rolling. Plus, you can find me on my other platforms to stay in the loop. With your help, this show, The Message of Liberty, will be seen and heard by more people. As always, I appreciate you tuning in.